Hello, everyone. This is the 19th episode of the Soccernostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles, and I'm joined by Paul from Shipley in England. We are pleased to have Mr. Davey Naylor back on our podcast. To remind everyone, Mr. Naylor is the administrator of EnglandStats.com. We continue our interview series with Mr. Naylor as we discuss the matches of the England national team during the 1984 and 85 season. 1984-85 is a season that at its end would include two tragedies. Of course, I am speaking of the Heisel disaster as well as the Bradford Stadium fire, both in May of 1985. While these incidents may have had no bearing on the national team, they did have ramifications on English football, and we can't go through this season without mentioning these incidents. To pick up where we left off last time, we finished in the summer of 1984, where England had taken a tour of South America. While the results were somewhat average, a win, a loss, and a tie, this tour has historically been regarded as a turning point in Bobby Robson's fortunes as a national team manager. Now, the new season, 1984-85, England would be involved with the 1986 World Cup qualifiers. They were in a group with Northern Ireland, Romania, Finland, and Turkey. And obviously, as England, they were favorites to win the group, but they had competition from Northern Ireland, who had qualified for the 1982 World Cup, and Romania, who had just come off the 1984 Euros. So the season started with a friendly on September 12th, 1984 at a almost empty Wembley Stadium when England took on East Germany. The crowd of 24,000 was again a very low tally. This was the beginning of a season friendly with not much at stake, which would explain it. For this match, Bobby Robson picked the following squad. Peter Shilton of Southampton in the goal, Mike Duxbury, Man United, Kenny Sansom, Arsenal, right back, left back, Mark Wright of Southampton, Terry Butcher of Ipswich, central defense, Stephen Williams of Southampton, Ray Wilkins, who had joined with Mark Haitley that season at AC Milan in Italy, Brian Robson of Man United captaining the side, John Barnes of Watford. Up front, you had Paul Mariner of Ipswich and Tony Woodcock of Arsenal. During the match, Bobby Robson would make a double substitution, replacing the two front strikers, Mariner and Woodcock, and replacing them with Mark Haitley, who we mentioned had just joined AC Milan, and Trevor Francis, still at Sampdoria. They both came on in the 80th minute. Well, after they came on, England scored their winner, where Sansom would send a cross to the far post, Wilkins would nod it down, and Robson would score with a volley. But otherwise, this was a forgettable match and very disappointing match and not much to assess from, I suppose. What do you think?
Hello, by the way. Hi, it's Davey here. That sums this match up perfectly. Sansom cross, Wilkins nod down, Robson volley. That was
a beautiful volley. A beautiful.
It was. It's a very good goal, but
yeah.
It's a very unforgettable match. A very forgettable match. Sorry, not much happened here. It was just a very boring match, and and not many people were very inspired by it. I mean, 23,000 people in Wembley would have been like,
almost a fifth of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been very quiet, yeah. And I guess the match suited it. The only other interesting thing I can say about this match, it was Terry Butcher's 25th cap. So, and most of those had come under Bobby Robson. So he's definitely, this time he's paired with Wright. I think this is the first time Butcher and Wright are actually paired together. And this is the start, I think, of the Butcher and Wright central defensive partnership, which goes all the way into the 1990 World Cup. This is where he finds that he's still, as you can see, searching for a decent striker. Robson's got his two main midfielders in Wilkins and Brian Robson, but he's still looking for the striker. He's using Mariner and Woodcock and Haitley and Francis. He doesn't know that Gary Lineker is waiting around the corner for him, but still trying to find that player. And this is an unusual game as well. It's beginning of the season. It's against a reasonably okay opposition. I think East Germany, in the retrospective rankings, they were about 12th or 13th in the world in the ELO rankings that have been redone, but forgettable match, definitely.
Paul, around this time, I guess Paul Mariner, we can see that he's kind of coming towards the tail end of his England career, and his next cap would be in May. So you're seeing that he's kind of getting off of reckoning, so to speak.
Yeah, I think both Mariner and Woodcock, it's towards the end of their England careers, and as Davey says, Bobby Robson's looking and waiting for the really prolific striker to emerge that I think England had lacked for a few years. Trevor Francis as well. I know he plays a few times this season, but also coming towards the end of his England career as well. It's looking like, there's a few players in there who are really established and will certainly go through the next few seasons. So we can see already a progression from the previous couple of seasons, that it's a more settled lineup. There's more familiar faces. There's a basis of a team there that Bobby Robson's going to take more or less through to 1990.
I want to bring up what you said for last season. I remember you mentioned that after the tour, Bobby Robson more or less not only knew what players he could count on, it was what players he could not count on. You could see that he's kind of whittling the squad down and kind of settling for a more settled lineup.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Paul Mariner is a prime example here. The next cap he gets, as you rightly said, in May, is his last. He's 31 at this point, and also Francis is 30. Tony Woodcock is coming up to 29. Haitley stays around quite a bit, and he's only on his fifth cap. He's only 22 at this point. Yeah, he's still... One of the criticisms of Bobby Robson at the beginning was that it was a slow start during his managerial career, his England managerial career. But also, big criticism was that he used a lot of players. Now, looking back on it, it makes sense, really. He's not certain who his best players are, so he wants to try as many as possible. Now, if you look at that from now, that's what managers do. I mean, when Sven became England manager in the noughties, he systematically went through a lot of players, and I don't think that was ever levelled at him. He probably used more players. I don't know the statistics, how many players Bobby Robson used and how many Sven-Goran Eriksson used, but I would guess Sven probably used a lot more players when he found out. Before he found his team, he was using a lot of, especially wide men, left backs, right backs, and wide men. That was a criticism that was levelled at Bobby Robson, and in the first couple of years, he was using a lot of players. We have talked about this before. He has a spine of Shilton, Butcher, Robson, and Wilkins. We see now Mark Wright join that as a central defensive pairing. He's got Sampson as his left back. Got John Barnes, which he uses quite a lot as a winger, and also Mercurial Hoddle when he's fit or actually is playing well. He uses him quite a lot, but he's still not found that striker yet. He's still using quite a lot of players here. Some that he has blooded himself, like Haitley and Lineker, others from the previous administration, as it were. He's still not sure. Woodcock and Mariner and Trevor Francis. Don't forget, England lost at the end of the 82 World Cup. We lost Brooking and Keegan, two of the best good strike partnership there. So he's had to start again with his strikers. And I think he finds them this season. This is the season that he finds, and the team is starting to come together. He's got more square pegs fitting square holes rather than trying to, move people around. So I think he's beginning to find it during this 84-85 season.
Just a couple of interesting points about East Germany before we go to the next match. This was Joachim Streich's 100th appearance for East Germany. This is at a time when 100 caps meant something. Obviously, Joachim Streich was a legend of East German football. He participated in the 1974 World Cup. For football historians, a bit of trivia. On this day, September 12, 1984, East Germany actually played 2 international matches. Now, while the main team, I would presume, were playing England at Wembley, B team of sorts with many full internationals were at Zwickau. Both matches, the one in Greece as well, are considered official matches and East Germany records. This is just an interesting point that they played 2 matches on one day.
The Football Association experimented with this back in the 19th century. One of the quirky things that they tried to do, it was very arrogant of them, but this was during the period where there was a distinct definition between the amateur and the professional. And so they would regularly, during the home championship in the 1880s and 1890s, they would sometimes field 2 teams on the same day to go one. I think the professionals would go play Ireland and the amateurs would play Wales, and there were 2 separate teams on it. So this is not a new thing, but it's quite interesting though. Quite right. It's quite a weird thing to do.
After that, we start with the World Cup qualifiers. England's first opponents were Finland on October 17th, 1984, again at Wembley. So, on this day, England wearing red, you had the following lineup. Peter Shilton in goal, Mike Duxbury, Kenny Sansom, right back, left back. Mike Duxbury would be replaced in the second half by Gary Andrew Stevens. And we always have to mention, not to be confused with Gary Michael Stevens of Everton, who would also come to the fore. So this is Gary Andrew Stevens of Tottenham. You had Mark Wright, Terry Butcher, central defense, Ray Wilkins, Brian Robson, and John Barnes, and Stephen Williams of Southampton. Up front, now you have Mark Haitley starting with Tony Woodcock. This season, we have to mention that Mark Haitley would be successful in the Italian Serie A, where he would be nicknamed Attila. And this was a season where Mark Haitley became, I would say, England's top striker for the season. During this match, we should also mention that Brian Robson would be replaced by Mark Chamberlain of Stoke in the 80th minute, which would be his 8th and final cap. If you remember on our first podcast, he started in 1982. So this would be his final cap. Also, Bobby Robson decided that Mike Duxbury was not going to be his right back. And this was his 10th and final cap. During 83-84, he was a regular at right back throughout. But this would be his final cap as well. So the match itself would be a relatively easy win for England. As we mentioned, Mark Haitley playing with renewed confidence as England's main striker, scored twice, 29th and 49th minute. Tony Woodcock scored 1 goal, 40th minute. Brian Robson in the 71st minute. And Kenny Sansom would score his first and only goal for England in the 85th minute. And also, just to mention that this was Gary Andrew Stevens' first cap when he came on as a sub. So what do you guys remember from this match?
I remember this reasonably well. It was a pretty straightforward win against the part-timers of Finland. They really didn't stand a chance, really. They had a moderately better crowd, 47,000, but it still would be half empty. This was, as you said, 2 for Haitley, Woodcock, Robson, and then an unusual Kenny Sansom goal. You don't see many of those. In fact, he only scored once in his, I believe, 86 caps he got.
Yes.
So it's quite a rarity to see this one. But it was a routine win against a very average opposition. In fact, the first 2 games England had, because they will play Turkey in the next match, which we'll talk about in a minute. These were 2 games that would expect for England to win, and they did quite handsomely, both of them. Yeah.
Also, the crowd of 47,234, which was an improvement from a previous match, it was the lowest ever at Wembley for a World Cup qualifying match.
There you go. Yeah.
So, but at least it was half full, we should say, I would assume.
I don't know what it was in I don't know why in 84 I don't know what I wouldn't know what it was that was stopping it. Maybe ticket prices were too expensive. Maybe the opposition wasn't particularly that good. So I don't know why these attendances aren't great. I can't remember. I would be only 11 years old, so I can't tell you what the economic climate would be for your average person, why they weren't going to see football. I don't know. This is obviously the pre-Premier League era, so maybe there is a wane on watching football. I know there was certainly, I do remember there being a bit of a lull during the middle of the 80s, so maybe this is all part of it. People weren't going to football.
Any takeaways from this match, Paul?
Definitely a combination of those factors on the crowd, that it wasn't expected to be a competitive game, and the Football League, I think this season or the next, one of those seasons I think is the lowest cumulative crowds that English football ever had. So as Davey says, it's a bit of a low point for English football. You know, that was happening in domestically as well for league games as well as international. For the game itself, a comfortable win, and as you say, Mark, Haitley's starting to establish himself as a really prominent player in that team, obviously gaining confidence from doing well in Italy as well, having gone from the second division and never made a massive impression up to that point in club football in England. The goal in Brazil and the transfer to AC Milan seemed to really transform him.
Certainly, yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
On a personal note, to let you guys know that this was the year, 84-85, that I was living in France. I was able to watch many of that, if not the full matches, I was able to watch many of these highlights, not only for the England national team, but also league matches. And obviously this was the season of where Everton had a magnificent season. I also was able to follow along with superb magazines like France Football and Ons. So this was a season that for myself, I have more memories because I was more exposed to the highlights and TV coverage. So most of these matches are beginning to stand out more for me in my personal memory, I would say.
I can go along with that as well, because for me, the school that I went to, they started, for some reason, it was all part of a lot of the games during this season, especially the next game, the Turkey game, be on a Wednesday afternoon. And for some reason, this sticks in my mind, is that our Wednesday afternoon at school for me was sports afternoon. And we always had games on Wednesday afternoons. And for some reason, it might have been raining back home, but we were dumped in front of a television to watch the next match, the Turkey-England game, on a Wednesday afternoon. So, and this happened quite often during 84-85. So this is when I first started really seeing full games on television.
Wow, so your school allowed that? I'm surprised.
Yeah. It must have been a rainy afternoon, and we weren't allowed out onto the playing field. So they got our class to put the telly on and went and made a cup of tea, maybe went and had a cigarette out the back, just leave them to watch the football. And it was a very entertaining game. I mean, England romped home quite spectacularly. So all the kids were cheering and hollering and having a great old time.
Let's get to that match. This was on November 14th, 84. It was England's first away trip at Istanbul. So this was the first ever match versus Turkey. England would dispose of Turkey 8-0 away. So you had Peter Shilton in goal, Viv Anderson making his first appearance of the season from Arsenal. And I noticed in the previous couple of seasons, he had maybe sporadic appearances, but from this match on, he would be more of a regular. And he'd been around the England setup for a number of years, but for some reason, the last couple of seasons, I guess Robson stuck with Duxbury, or maybe Viv Anderson was injured. I don't know. But anyway, so we have Viv Anderson of Arsenal right back, Kenny Sansom left back, Mark Wright, Terry Butcher, central defensive pairing, Stephen Williams, he'd be replaced by Gary Andrew Stevens of Tottenham in the 61st minute. You got Ray Wilkins, Brian Robson captaining the side, John Barnes, Peter Witt of Aston Villa, and he'd be replaced by Trevor Francis in the 66th minute, and Tony Woodcock of Arsenal. This would be Stephen Williams' sixth and final cap. And he played a few matches during the 83-84 season. And this was Peter Witt's 11th and final cap. And his first cap was in 1981. And again, he was never really an England regular. He would come in and out of the side here and there. I'm assuming there must have been injuries up front. Maybe some players, did Haitley play? No, Haitley didn't play this match. Maybe that's why he came to replace Haitley.
I guess I'm thinking that Robson thought that he could use with, but yeah, I think Haitley must have been injured. He surely would have played Haitley. He scored 2 goals in the previous game, so why he wouldn't have played him here?
In this game, so Robson had a hat-trick, 13th, 44th, 58th minute. Woodcock had a double, 17th and 61st minute. John Barnes scored in the 46th and 56th minutes. And Viv Anderson scored his first ever goal for England in the 86th minute to round out the scoring. And this was England's best away win since defeating United States 10-0 in 1964. By all accounts, this was a very easy match. And Bobby Robson is quoted as saying that it is not often you score 8 and yet you feel you have let your opponents off the hook. So it could have been even worse.
I watched this game recently again. The Turkish defence is, well, static is kind to say. They don't move. Some of the goals are just so easy. The defence, they just stand and watch. It's quite incredible that professional football. Well, maybe they're not professional footballers at this point. Maybe they're part time, but international footballers at least could actually just stand and watch while the opponent scores. Right. If you can find this game on YouTube, which it is on there, I would have a look at it. It's quite comical, really. And Robson does say at the end, yes, they let them off the hook. On commentary, I believe you have Jimmy Greaves, and he says Turkey are third rate. They are worse than that. They are laughably not very good opposition. And 8 was, to be kind, really. They could have knocked in double figures easily.
And by the way, this would not be the only 8-0 win for England against Turkey that decade.
No. There's another one in 87, I think, when they played them again. Yes. Is that right? 87 when they played for the Euro 88 qualifiers. Right. Yeah, again, it's... but I do remember in that one, then the return fixture is a 0-0, and like they'd won the match. But bless them. But yeah, they were a very poor side. I mean, Turkey ended up becoming a really decent side. I remember 2002 World Cup, they did rather well. Got to the semi-finals, I believe. Is that right?
Right. Finished third.
So, yeah, that's right. So they did progress very well later on. But back in the 80s, they were a very, very poor side. Very poor.
Any memories from this match, Paul?
Yeah, I don't remember watching it at school. I don't know what happened there. Yeah,
must have gone to the wrong school, Paul.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, when they say there are no easy games in international football, I'm not sure it applied to some of the games in the 80s. And I think you'd say, if England were playing Turkey and Finland now, you'd be expecting really tough games. And at the time, these were expected to be comfortable victories. Obviously, this one much more so than you'd imagine. But yeah, really, a really good performance as well. Peter Wiv, he was always effective striker. He must have been in his 30s at this time. And as you say, it's his last cap. And Steve Williams, we should mention as well, it's his last cap. But he did very nearly score in this game. I think one of the goals was a rebound from him hitting the post. So he was a little bit unlucky not to get an international goal. But yeah, that was
with his 33 at this point. So yes, that's the reason why he's getting a bit. Yeah. And interestingly, the fullbacks score again. In the last match, Kenny Sampson's only goal. This time it's right back Viv Anderson's first goal. He does score 2 in his England career, Viv Anderson, but this is the first one. He gets quite an easy tap in at the end. The last goal, the 8th goal.
And I think Stephen Williams, did he join Arsenal shortly thereafter, right?
It was this season, definitely.
That season,
he never really, he had a couple of seasons at Arsenal, but obviously never got back in the England team. And I think then he went to Luton and never really got back to that level that he'd been at when he was at Southampton.
We're slowly seeing players being whittled down, like you said, players who Robson feels are not going to be there, let's say, in Mexico in a year's time. The year ended on a positive note for England. It seemed like Bobby Robson's England were headed in the right direction. The new year starts, 1985, and they have a much sterner test. On February 27th, 1985, England are playing at Belfast against Northern Ireland. Just to mention, this was Pat Jennings' 108th cap, where at the time he tied Bobby Moore. England, we have Peter Shilton, Viv Anderson, Kenny Sansom, right back, left back. Mark Wright is missing from this match. So you have Alvin Martin of West Ham being recalled to the side, partnering with Terry Butcher. Brian Robson is missing. So you have Andrew Stevens of Tottenham starting in midfield. And now you have a new debutant, Trevor Stephen of Everton. Again, we have to mention Everton were having a magnificent season, and his inclusion was long overdue, and he would be a mainstay for the national team for the years to come. So you have Trevor Stephen in midfield, John Barnes, and up front you have Tony Woodcock and Mark Haitley. And Tony Woodcock would be replaced by Trevor Francis in the 80th minute. Let me just go through the Northern Ireland side as well. Billy Bingham's side, you had Pat Jennings, Arsenal, Jimmy Nicol, West Bromwich Albion, Mal Donaghy, Luton, John O'Neill, Leicester, John McClelland, Watford, Captain Sammy McElroy of Stoke, Paul Ramsey of Leicester, Ian Stewart of QPR, Jerry Armstrong. At this point, he was at Real Mallorca in Spain. You have Jimmy Queen of Blackburn Rovers and Norman Whiteside of Man United. So a good side. This match would be won with a single goal in the 77th minute by Mark Haitley, who scored from the edge of the box. And again, this goes to show how important and prolific Mark Haitley was at this point as England's main striker. And an away win against one of their main opponents was a very positive result. And it went along to make England the favorites for this group after this win.
This is a good Northern Ireland team. You just read that out. That's a really, really good with the 19-year-old Norman Whiteside.
Right.
It's a really strong. I mean, they'd been to the 82 World Cup and they would go to the 86 World Cup as well. I believe they did do that, didn't they?
Yes.
I remember Pat Jennings. Yes, he bowed out against Brazil. That's right. I remember that. That's a great game. That was. He had a great match. They lost, but he had a great match. But yeah, this is a tough opposition. Northern Ireland in early 80s. That's a good team, and it's a good 2 points that England win on the road here. They would probably Bobby Robson would probably have gone into the game thinking, if I can get a draw, that would suit me. But he got to win one goal. Yeah,
especially without Robson.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you guys think about Trevor Stephen's inclusion? At this point, Everton was on fire.
A lot of people were calling for his inclusion, and with the loss of Brian Robson, it seems a no-brainer really to pick a 21-year-old Trevor Stephen in that centre, and he does well. And he goes on to this will be the first of 36 caps. So I think it's another one that he's tinkering slightly with his squad, but I think he's found another one. Yes. Trevor Stephen goes to the World Cup in '86. So and I remember Trevor Stephen. Yes, always. When I think of the '80s team, Trevor Stephen is one of the players I always remember.
Yeah, I mean, he would be mainstay, I would say, until 1988, and after that, he was still around at 90, and even around 92, he got a cap as well. But he was at his height between 85 and 88 with England and Everton.
He has a weird England career. His final games are in the European Championship in '92, but he does start in '85, and he goes to the World Cup and the European Championship. Where he doesn't play though. No, he does play. He does play in the '88 European Championship as well. But and the 1990 World Cup, he plays in two of the. He comes on against Cameroon and West Germany in the knockout rounds. But again, I think he's seen more of a kind of, I mean, I don't want to be unkind to him, but I think Bobby Robson would probably think him as a backup to Brian Robson. I think they were very similar. Well, I wouldn't say similar players because no one's similar to Brian Robson, but I think they had similar positions, and I think he could be relied on if Robson, because we all know what happened with Robson. I mean, he had so many injuries. I mean, he was such a brilliant player that you always had to play him, even if he was. And in fact, he did play injured quite a lot. He was remarkable, man. But because he was quite susceptible to injury, he needed to see other players. He couldn't rely on Butch Wilkins. Well, Ray Wilkins would normally take the captain's armband if Robson wasn't playing, but he needed somebody else. And when Robson inevitably did get injured in 2 World Cups, I believe he got injured in the '86 World Cup. He did, and then again in the 1990 World Cup. So it was Trevor Stephen that comes in for him both times.
After this match, this key win, England had a friendly in the following month on March 26th at Wembley against the Republic of Ireland. Bobby Robson took the opportunity to include a few new caps. So you had Gary Bailey earning his first cap, goalkeeper of Man United, Viv Anderson, Kenny Sansom, Mark Wright, and Terry Butcher. I guess it was now the set defense of England at this point. So you have Trevor Stephen starting again, Brian Robson back in the side. He captaining the side. He would be replaced by Glenn Hoddle of Tottenham in the 67th minute, making his first appearance of the season. Another new cap, Chris Waddle of Newcastle United. He'd be starting along with Ray Wilkins. Chris Waddle was replacing John Barnes in the lineup for this match as a winger. Up front, you had Mark Haitley and Gary Lineker of Leicester, making his first appearance of the season. We should remind everyone that he had made his debut the previous season. Was it against Scotland?
Scotland in the very last home championship match, right. Yeah.
So again, this season, I believe he would be the top goal scorer in the league. So his inclusion is not much of a surprise.
Yeah, he's still at Leicester at this point. He doesn't go till Everton. Gosh, is it the end of this season he goes to Everton? I can't remember.
Yes, this season. Yeah. So, and also replacing Mark Haitley in the 73rd minute is another new cap, Peter Davenport of Nottingham Forest, in his one and only cap for England. So as far as the match itself, Trevor Stephen in his second cap, he opened the scoring for England in the 44th minute. Gary Lineker would score his first goal for England in the 76th minute. And Liam Brady would pull a goal back with 3 minutes left. And let's just go through the Irish lineup as well. You had Packy Bonner of Celtic in goal, Chris Hughton of Tottenham, Mick McCarthy of Man City, Mark Lawrenson of Liverpool, Jim Beglin of Liverpool, Paul McGrath of Man U. He'd be replaced by David O'Leary of Arsenal in the 46th minute. Gary Waddock of QPR. Liam Brady, at this point, he was at Inter in Italy. Ronnie Whelan of Liverpool. He'd be replaced by Kevin O'Callaghan of Portsmouth in the 70th minute. Frank Stapleton of Man United. Eamon O'Keefe of Portwell. He'd be replaced by John Byrne of QPR in the 79th minute. The Ireland side was also essentially a first division England side as well. So the game stands out for the match in which Gary Lineker scored his first goal for England. And also, we should also mention that this was the 5th win in a row at Wembley for England. Otherwise, it was an experimental match. I'm just surprised this match wasn't played before the Northern Ireland match as a friendly before a qualifier, but
yeah, I think it's interesting this season because the British Championship had failed the previous year, various reasons, lowering of attendances. In this game, only 34,000 people at Wembley, not 35,000 people. So again, half empty. Dwindling attendances. There was the rise of hooliganism The troubles in Northern Ireland was another factor, especially in the 83 campaign. It's very interesting. So the tournament ends the previous year, but then England, because they're playing Northern Ireland in the World Cup, they're drawn with them in the World Cup qualifying, and they want to keep the Scotland-England fixture because that was the only one which did draw the crowds. They keep that one. So they throw in the Republic. So it's like the home championship hasn't finished. They're kind of still playing this would-be quasi-home championship where they play Northern Ireland, they play Republic of Ireland, they play Scotland. So they kind of cling on to it, I guess. But other than that, this is a game known for Gary Lineker's first goal. I love Gary Bailey. I was a Man United fan when I was about 12 years old here. And I love Gary Bailey. I remember him in this match with his shocking blonde hair. And I thought he was a great keeper. He only got 2 caps, I guess, because Shilton was always around. We're not going to get too many caps when Schultz is playing.
Not to mention Chris Woods.
And Chris Woods as well was the other one. I guess Ray Clements had retired by then, or he wasn't being picked, I think. Right. But also, yes, Chris Waddle, he gets his first cap and the first start as well. And this is Lineker's first start as well. So this is where the bits of the puzzle are coming together now for Bobby Robson. This is, I think, the first game, really. Obviously, Gary Bailey's in place of Shilton. But if you look at the lineup, you've got Anderson and Sampson, left back, right back. You've got Wright and Butcher, central defensive pairing. He's kind of found those. You've got Robson, you've got Wilkins in the middle, you've got Haitley and Lineker. And Waddle, all you need now is Peter Beardsley, and there's your team. That's Bobby Robson's team there.
Yeah, that's true.
And we should just mention Peter Davenport as well, it being his only cap. And he did actually make Lineker's goal in this game. And was a very good player at the time at Nottingham Forest. I think he was still at Nottingham Forest anyway. And then
yes,
he was, yeah.
Yeah, he never, after he moved to Manchester United, another player who never really realised his potential and obviously never got back in the England team. But yeah, at that time he was one of the better strikers in the first division. So his chance was just this one game.
And another thing that's worth pointing out is the list of the Ireland team. They're all household names. This is another good Irish team that England have gone to Belfast and beaten Northern Ireland against a very good team. And this is, albeit a friendly at Wembley, but there's some good household names there. Mark Lawrence and Ronnie Whelan, Paul McGrath, Frank Stapleton, David O'Leary.
The next match, another important qualifier away from home on May 1st at Bucharest against Romania that we mentioned had made the 1984 Euro finals. On that day, England lined up with Peter Shilton, Viv Anderson, Kenny Sansom, Mark Wright, Terry Butcher, the defense, Trevor Stephen, Brian Robson captaining, Ray Wilkins, John Barnes. He'd be replaced by Chris Waddle in the 73rd minute. Up front, you had Trevor Francis and Paul Mariner, Arsenal, and he'd be replaced by Gary Lineker in the 84th minute. And we mentioned earlier, this was Paul Mariner's final cap for England. And he had started in 1977 under Don Revie. So he'd been around a while, but this was his final cap. This was, again, good away point against a solid side. And just to go through some of the players' names of Romania, some of whom would win the Champions Cup the following season for Romania. So you had Silviu Lung, Nicolae Negrila, Gino Iorgulescu, he replaced by Stefan Jovan, 39th minute. Costica Stefanescu was the captain. Nicolae Ungurianu, Mircea Rednic, Michael Klein, Ladislav Boloni, George Hagi, Marcel Coras, he'd replaced by Marius Lakatus, another household name in the 70th minute. And finally, Rodion Kamataru. So decent players, like this, some of them would win the Champions Cup the following season, many of whom had played in the 1984 Euros and would make the 1990 World Cup as well. Getting a point at Bucharest, especially remembering that England had lost, was it in 1981, I believe? was it late 1980? It was during the 1982 qualifiers. I remember England had lost at Bucharest. So getting a point there was a good result. And again, England were headed for qualification without much surprise.
Yeah, this was I would have suspected that Bobby Robson thought a point would be really good. This is a good Romanian team, and you're right, they lost. They almost contrived in the '82 World Cup qualification, throw it all away and miss out on the third World Cup in a row. But they managed to pull it out by beating Hungary in the last game to qualify for that World Cup. This, however, this World Cup qualifying thing has been a bit of a breeze so far, and going to beating the minnows of Finland and Turkey was pretty straightforward, but then going to Northern Ireland and getting a win and then getting a draw in Romania, I think Bobby Robson will be very, very happy. Very happy.
And again, Mark Haitley is missing, so that's why Paul Mariner is starting, I presume. This was his final cap.
This is Mariner's last cap, yeah. And now he's got, I guess, because there are a few more people in the pecking order. You see Gary Lineker become a starter. You've got Haitley. So Paul Mariner, I think, whilst he's not particularly that old, he's 31. He's coming up to 32, so it's not that old. But I think there are a lot more people in the pecking order. But I think he's in this game because Haitley's injured and Gary Lineker's still a bit raw. Again, you can see the semblance of his side here. Pitt Shilton, Anderson, Sampson, Stephen, Wright, Butcher, Robson, Wilkins, Waddle and Lineker coming on, John Barnes in there. So this is the classic Bobby Robson lineup coming in here. He's finding these players now. And during the rest all the way into the 1990 World Cup, from this point onwards, he doesn't start tinkering that much. People accused him of using too many players at the start of his reign, but once he finds his team, he plays them generally all the way through, unless they're injured.
This is more or less a settled squad minus Haitley, I would say.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And very solid defensively. They've not let in a goal in the qualifiers up to this point as well, and that's, you can see there's a very settled defence there with Shilton, Anderson, Sansom, Wright and Butcher. Very solid defence.
Yeah, not let any in, scored 14. It's pretty good so far.
Expected to be a tough game, and as Sean said, Romania's got a lot of really good players. I think this is the first time I think Hadji had played in the European Championship, but this is the first time I remember seeing him playing, knocking shots in from all distances. Yeah, you could see he was a great player even then.
Yeah, I think 21 or 22 at this point, I think.
20, actually. He was born in 65, so he'd only be 20.
Even younger, yeah.
So, yeah, this is the first time we'd seen Hadji, and wow, what a player. Brilliant player. Yeah, and he could hit a ball. He Bobby Charlton-esque when he kicked the ball, it stayed kicked.
Well, that's why he's called the Maradona of the Carpathian Mountains.
Is he? So. Brilliant. Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's a brilliant player. One of my favourites of growing up watching Hadji.
We should mention that as we kind of touched up on the intro, 10 days after this match, there would be the Bradford Stadium fire. It showed how, I would say, old and decrepit, how some of the England stadium were. And it took a tragedy and another tragedy later on to bring it to attention. And obviously Hillsborough was a few years away, but hooliganism and stadia non-safety was a major issue for this and the following seasons, I would say. From what I remember, it was a wooden stadium. That was the reason why. It was like an old wooden stadium. That's why the unfortunate tragedy happened.
Sorry, I remember it very well. It was they'd cut to it. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Grandstand would be on. They actually went live and it was awful, absolutely awful. I remember watching it live. It was an utterly awful thing.
Paul, I mean, that was very close to where you are.
Yeah, the stand had actually been condemned, and I think it was going to be knocked down shortly after that. But it showed there was a lot of complacency. You know, those sort of facilities were just left, however old that stand was, and it had failed its safety certificates and was known to be a hazard. And it just showed that a lot of things were taken for granted, that people would just turn up to games no matter what the facilities were. And yeah, I was in Leeds where I grew up, so it was obviously very close to home. And I actually went to a game. They recreated the 1966 World Cup final later that summer.
Oh, yes, yes.
England-West Germany, certainly all of the England team at that time. At Ellen Road, they had a game to raise money for the fire disaster fund, which I went to. It was obviously a very sad occasion because of what it was commemorating, but great to see the players that were involved in it. And I think maybe looking back, that the fire should have been a bigger wake-up call for English football. I think it was sort of written off as a one-off, and facilities didn't really improve. And as you say, Hillsborough was only a few years away. But it was very scary as a kid who was going to games, and could have happened at any number of grounds. It's a real tragedy for English football.
And again, there will be another tragedy later that month, which we'll get to. But as far as the national team, just 3 weeks after this Romania match, England had another away qualifier, this time at Helsinki against Finland. Now, for that day, England lineup was Peter Shilton, Viv Anderson, Kenny Sansom, Terry Butcher. Terry Fenwick would make his first appearance of the season. Recalled to the side from QPR. He made a few appearances the previous season, and I assume Mark Wright must have been injured for this match. Then you had Trevor Stephen. He'd be replaced by Chris Waddle in the 79th minute. Brian Robson captaining the side. Ray Wilkins, John Barnes. Up front, you had Mark Haitley and Trevor Francis. So this was as close to a settled England side, minus Mark Wright, I would say. Surprisingly, Finland took the lead in the 5th minute and held on to the lead until early in the second half, when, again, a confident Mark Haitley would tie the match in the 50th minute. And again, it was an away point, but I'm assuming many people would have felt that England perhaps should have won against such an opposition. What was your takeaway?
Definitely England should have won this game. Finland take a shot lead early in the game, and England struggle to get back into it. They get the goal at the start of the second half, and you'd think they'd go on and continue to get the win, but they struggle. They struggle against a very ordinary Finland side. They are not, again, they are part-timers, really. So it's not a disaster because England had done great groundwork in the previous game. So it's not a major disaster. They're still top of the table. But they would have expected to win this. This is the first disappointment of this season. They've been very, very good. This is a game where those old problems that England have come back and they just couldn't get the ball in the net.
But like you said, there was no cause to panic, surprisingly, because England had been doing so well in the group and they were far ahead of their opponents. I didn't feel like there was a cause to panic, but definitely...
No, there wasn't really, but I would expect it. I think Robson would have been very disappointed that they couldn't find the winner in this game. They had all the tools there to do it, but they just couldn't crack a very stubborn Finnish defence. And I think the Finns would have been delighted.
Finland, for those World Cup qualifiers, like we said, they defeated Northern Ireland. They got a point off of England. And I believe they defeated Turkey as well in their group.
Yeah.
So I guess they did okay at home for a team that was so regarded as a minnow, so to speak. After that, just 3 days later, England were facing their annual clash with Scotland with the new Rouse Cup. And to remind everyone, Rouse Cup was formed after the dissolution of the home championship. And the Rouse Cup, named after Stanley Rouse, was to be an annual event between England and Scotland. As you said earlier, it was the only money-making match between the home nations, so that's why they had decided to keep it. Due to security concerns, this first match was not held at Wembley, and it would be at Glasgow's Hampden Park. And Scotland themselves had a World Cup qualifier in a few days' time, while England had just finished a World Cup qualifier, and they were about to be headed to a tour in Mexico. So there were many matches coming up. We should mention that this match took place a few days ahead of the Heisel tragedy. Liverpool players who were involved in that final were missing for Scotland, such as Dalglish, Steve Nicol, and Alan Hansen, as well as injuries such as Aberdeen's Neil Simpson, as well as Man United's Arthur Albiston.
There's still a very good Scottish team, though, even with missing those players. Very good team. So I'll let you do the team sheet. Sorry.
Yeah. And England were missing Trevor Stephen. So the England side on that day was Peter Shilton, Viv Anderson, Kenny Sansom, Terry Fenwick, Terry Butcher in defense, Glenn Hoddle earning a rare start, and he'll be replaced by Lineker in the 79th minute. We had Brian Robson, Ray Wilkins, John Barnes, the standard midfield. Chris Waddle would replace John Barnes in the 63rd minute. And we're really seeing that Chris Waddle's making a big push as an alternative as a winger in the side and challenging John Barnes. And up front, you have Mark Haitley and Trevor Francis. And the Scotland lineup, you had Jim Leighton, Aberdeen, Richard Gough, Dundee United, Maurice Malpas, Dundee United, Alex McLeish, Willie Miller, the central defensive player of Aberdeen, Roy Aitken of Celtic, Gordon Strachan, Man United. He'd be replaced by Murdo McLeod in the 71st minute. Graham Souness, captain of the side. This season he was at Sampdoria. Steve Archibald of Barcelona. James Bett, he was at Lokeren at Belgium. And David Speedy of Chelsea. We should also mention that for this match, Scotland unveiled their new shorts with a navy blue stripe across. This was the very first match they did. Again, this would be indelible memory of Scotland kit, these shorts. They would wear them until, for sure, they wore them at the World Cup. I know that, maybe even beyond that. So, but getting back to the match itself, Steve Archibald for Scotland, he was starting ahead of Mo Johnson. And for England, Glenn Hoddle was starting because Trevor Stephen was absent. And for Scotland, David Speedy was earning his first cap. It turned out to be a poor match on a wet, rainy day. And the likes of Robson had a disappointing match. And Hoddle actually is said to have played okay. He was given an opportunity and he was trying to make the best out of it. But otherwise, it was a tough physical match. And
they always are against Scotland. I could never consider a game against Scotland to be friendly ever. I mean, that's no disrespect to Scotland. It's because they are fierce rivals. And you would never expect a game against Scotland to be anything other than tough. And I guess we're seeing end-of-season blues for England here, that they could only get a draw in Finland. 3 days later, they lose against Scotland. And these aren't part-time players. These are a lineup that, but in both games, they are majority, maybe one or two players that you could consider being his best starting lineup. But, 9 of them, in his mind, his starting lineup. I guess it's the end of the season. That's the only thing I can see. But also, again, this Rouse Cup, which was there to replace the British Championship, the only fixture, as you said, which only made any money. But again, this is Hampden Park and only 66,000 people there. Hampden Park is big, and this would feel half empty as well. So this whole Rouse Cup thing, it's the reason why it didn't last very long. They do this for a couple of seasons, then they start inviting a South American opponent to join in. They do that, and then they abandoned it after a couple of years. It's not really working out, to be honest.
Right. And in this match, actually, Scotland scored against the run of play, I guess, when English were having their best period. And it was a header by Richard Gough. And surprisingly, Scotland would not defeat England until 1999. But we have to mention that they did not play every year in intervening years.
Up until 87, I believe, is the last of the Rouse Cups. Maybe 88.
It was 89. 89.
89.
With Chile, yeah.
They wouldn't play each other They have done recently simply because they rescheduled a few friendlies and also qualifying as well. But yes, the 99 playoff, that would be the next time that they play. I believe Scholes scores at Hampden twice, and then Scotland win at Wembley, but yes. but it's on aggregate, so England go to the 2000. That's right. This is the waning of the. This is for over 100 years. England have faced more than 100, 110, 120 years. England and Scotland have always. There has always been a fixture, Scotland fixture every year, barring wars, and this is the start of the end of it, I'm afraid.
Yes.
Have at the end of a long season, and this was a really long season for England, certainly, but I think this is just after the FA Cup final, so Everton had been involved in that, plus the Cup Winners' Cup, which Everton won as well. So I think that might be why there's no Everton players involved in this one.
And you mentioned also Liverpool players aren't there as well, but they've some Scottish players. I don't think there are any Liverpool players in the England side at the moment. Well, not regulars anyway. I guess John Barnes goes to Liverpool shortly after. Again,
87,
87, so not too far away. And they've got another end-of-season tour coming up, this time to Mexico, as a warm-up thing for the World Cup.
A few days after this match, on May 29th, there's the Heisel Tragedy. After this tragedy, this would have major ramifications that we discussed for the English football in Europe. And essentially, English clubs would be banned from European competitions indefinitely. I don't remember if they set a time limit at the time. I think it was indefinitely. And it would last 5 years in the end, 6 years for Liverpool. But this season's end was marred by the tragedies we discussed, Bradford and Heisel. While the national team could still compete, many of these footballers could not participate in European competitions, and that would hurt England national prospects. That would lead to many players transferring out in the seasons afterwards, but that's a separate discussion. Getting back to the football, the season had not ended for England national team. You mentioned they were invited to a tour of Mexico, which would serve as a dress rehearsal for the following season's World Cup. So England were invited along with Italy and West Germany to play in a tournament in Mexico.
To play 2 tournaments in Mexico.
Yes, I was going to get to that. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, carry on. But it is actually it's bizarre why they did this.
Yes, because of scheduling conflicts, West Germany was going to arrive at a later date, and Italy were to leave at an earlier date. They could not have like a 4-team round-robin tournament, which was to be called Azteca 2000. So what they had to do, they had to divide it up into Azteca 2000 and Ciudad de Mexico Cup. Although to this day, many people just refer to the whole thing as Azteca 2000. But to be factually correct, we have to mention that it was actually 2 competitions.
This is a week after the Heisel tragedy,
right.
And they play Italy.
Exactly.
Emotion is quite raw, and the very beautiful thing happens at the beginning of this match. Instead of lining up in a line as you normally do to do the national anthem, the players all lined up together. It was quite a beautiful little thing. It was a very small little token, but they all, as unity, they all randomly lined up together and listened to the national anthems together, which was quite a nice touch.
And also, like on the days before, I think they also held a joint mass together, if I'm not mistaken. There's a very famous photograph I remember with the Italian players and the English players together praying. This must have been a few days before the match. I don't recall exactly what date. But for their first match, which would be on June 6th. Now, this would be as part of the Ciudad de Mexico Cup at Azteca. All the matches were held at Azteca Stadium in scorching heat.
You know how big the Azteca Stadium in Mexico City is? There are only 7,000 people at this game. It's like, if you were to say to your friend who was sitting next to you, you'd probably have to shout at him because he was so far away.
Yes.
But it was a good game, actually. It was a very good game in the heat.
Yes, that would come to life in the last 20 minutes. So England lineup was Peter Shilton, Gary Michael Stevens of Everton, making his debut for England. Again, a lot of these Everton players, their form deserved recognition. And Gary Michael Stevens earned his first cap for this match at right back, and Kenny Sansom left back. You had Mark right back in the side, partnering with Terry Butcher. You had Trevor Stephen. He'd be replaced by Glenn Hoddle in the 63rd minute. You have Brian Robson captaining the side, Ray Wilkins, and Chris Waddle. And he'll be replaced by John Barnes in the 69th minute. And up front, you have Mark Haitley and Trevor Francis, who will be replaced by Gary Lineker in the 78th minute. And just going through the Italian lineup, you have Giovanni Galli of Fiorentina. He'll be replaced by Franco Tancredi of Roma in the 46th minute. You have Giuseppe Bergomi of Inter, Pietro Viercovod of Sampdoria, Fulvio Colovati captaining the side, Antonio Cabrini of Juventus would come in the 46th minute. You had Roberto Tricella of Verona as the libero. You had Beppe Baresi, not Franco Baresi, Beppe Baresi, his brother from Inter, starting. Bruno Conti of Roma, he'd be replaced by Pietro Fana of Verona in the 46th minute. You have Salvatore Bagni of Napoli. You had Antonio Di Gennaro of Verona. Up front, you have Giuseppe Galderizzi of Verona. He'd be replaced by Marco Tardelli of Juventus, 84th minute. And Alessandro Altobelli of Inter. The match itself would, as we said, would come to life in the last 20 minutes. So for the first goal in the 73rd minute, Salvatore Bagni attempted to cross the ball, but Peter Shilton misjudged the flight of the ball and the ball chipped over him. And again, this would be a reminiscent of some of his mistakes kind of towards the tail end, nearer the Italy 90 era.
So I remember it happening, a very similar goal. I think England were playing Israel, I believe. And he was chipped from a long distance. Yes, this was one of Shilton's. And of course, which is not particularly his fault, but in the World Cup, in the semi-final, the free kick, it hits Paul Parker and loops over Shilton's head. Shilton had this thing, he liked to stand out of his goal, and he was caught out a couple of times.
Foreshadowing what would happen in a year's time, England tied the match with a cross from the left side by substitute John Barnes, headed in by Mark Haitley.
Just change Haitley for Lineker, and you've got
exactly.
You've got those John Barnes crosses from the left were absolutely awesome. Yeah.
And towards the end of the match, Gareth Stevens was judged to have fouled Pietro Viercovod. It was a soft penalty by many observers, but Alessandro Altobelli scored from a penalty kick and gave Italy the victory. I remember the France manager, Henri Michel, was in the stands. We should mention other managers from other nations like Henri Michel of France and Guy Thys of Belgium took the opportunity to travel and spy on future opponents and supervise certain facilities. Henri Michel said that this was a poor match to watch.
I remember it being quite good fun. I mean, it would have been on very early, if it was on at all in the UK.
Well, the ending was entertaining for sure.
I think I remember seeing highlights. I doubt it would have been on live because it would have been late in the afternoon, I guess, on a Thursday. I think it was 2:00 kickoff in Mexico, so that would have probably been about, I don't know what the time difference is, probably evening in the UK. So it might have been on live. I'm not entirely sure. I remember watching it, so whether I saw highlights or not, but I just remember it being quite good fun.
Bobby Robson would emphasize difficulties with heat and altitude, and felt that Italians had been there, I guess, maybe a few days before and had actually played a couple of matches before them. So they were more used to the heat, I presume. And, more conditioned to play, according to Robson. As far as we can call this, like you said, end of season blues. These are tours that no one really wants to play. It seems like players would just rather rest and recuperate. But there's no choice for national team managers. They need these opportunities.
It's a good job as well when they decided to reschedule the format of the tournament because of the late participation of West Germany. It's a good job they didn't, which became 2 tournaments. It's a good job that what they did next is Mexico and England only play once. It could have been worse. They could have had to play twice, but they decided that they would actually only play once.
Yes. 3 days later, the next match would be concurrently Azteca 2000 and Ciudad de Mexico Cup match jointly. So England were playing the hosts, Mexico. And even though they were playing against the hosts, 15,000 in the Azteca is still a low crowd. I'm surprised more people didn't go given the hosts were playing. England made some changes from a previous match. You had Gary Bailey starting in goal, Viv Anderson, Kenny Sansom, right back, left back, Terry Fenwick, Dave Watson of Norwich. This was his first recall to the side since last year's South American tour. And he was in the central defense. And you had Glenn Hoddle starting. He'd be replaced by debutant Kerry Dixon of Chelsea, another striking option for England. So you had Brian Robson, Ray Wilkins. Ray Wilkins would be replaced by Everton's Peter Reid, another member of the Everton's championship winning side who earned his selection to Everton's obviously magnificent season. You had John Barnes starting. He'd be replaced by Chris Waddle in the 69th minute. And up front, you had again Mark Haitley and Trevor Francis. And this match, Mexico would strike the winner in the 20th minute. And it was a more attacking game, a more open match than the previous matches in this particular tournament. However, this was England's 3rd straight defeat. And this was the first time this had happened since 1959. And following this match, England's Serie A-based players, this would be Wilkins, Haitley, and Francis, they had to leave the squad and fly back to Italy as Italy's Coppa Italia was still going on. We're at the final stages. So they had to leave the squad after this match.
Well, the Italian team had to go back as well.
Right.
Because they couldn't do it, and that's the reason why. So the West Germans turned up late and the Italians had to leave early. So it wasn't a very organised competition,
right.
This. But and it's interesting that this lineup is slightly changed. And we've got Peter Reid coming in as his first cap, which is because he's 28 at the time. He's nearly 29. The only real memory I have of Peter Reid is the following year during the quarterfinal against Argentina, just being mesmerised by Maradona and just failing to catch up with him as he made that amazing goal. That's my memory of Peter Reid. Poor chap. But yes, it was I guess because he was Everton's championship winning season, he's gone along on this tour party. Other than that, apart from the recall of Dave Watson as well, this again is and Gary Bailey is a second and last cap. And this is again still a reasonably strong normal lineup. His main guys really.
Well, changes were bound to be made because you can't just play so many matches in the space of a few days. You need to give the players a rest.
Not in the heat either. No.
The scorching heat. Just watching the matches, and you would say that the following year as well. But it's during the midday sun. It seems like, obviously, for the benefit of, I'm assuming, European television, they're playing so early.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be playing. All these games were scheduled in the afternoon, so that for European television. Yeah,
had that problem as far back as 1970, hadn't they? I think.
Yes.
Games kicking off at midday.
Nowadays, they're very good at it. They have water breaks and all of that. But in those days, I remember the '94 World Cup. Jackie Charlton complaining of an official because he was trying to give one of his players a bottle of water during a game, and the official tried to stop him. At this time, they had no idea about what playing in that temperature could do to people. And nowadays, it's all health and safety, which I guess is a good thing. But in those days, you'd be zapped after a game like this. You'd lose quite a few pounds worth of sweat, I would think.
Oh, yes. The tour ended, well, not the tour, I'm sorry, the tournament. 3 days later, on June 12th, the Azteca 2000, as England, playing in red, took on West Germany at Azteca. As far as the participants, the West Germans were the most reluctant to participate in this particular tournament. And West German manager Franz Beckenbauer had openly opposed this tour. But these arrangements had been made prior to him becoming national team manager. So they were obligated to participate. And the team arrived on June 10th, just 2 days after the league season had ended, the Bundesliga. And they had only 48 hours to prepare for this match. And obviously, they were still not acclimatized to the weather conditions, the altitude, etc. And it would show in their display, where they were played out by an English side who at this point, after a couple of matches and maybe a week under their belt, were more conditioned to play in this heat.
Since the 66 World Cup, England's always struggled to beat Germany or West Germany. But this was the way to do it. Get them to step off the plane 48 hours before and not have them climatised to the altitude and the heat. That's how you beat the Germans. There we go. Why don't they think of this every time?
Yes. So England lined up with Peter Shilton, Gary Michael Stevens of Everton, Kenny Sansom, Mark Wright Butcher, Glenn Hoddle starting again, Brian Robson. He would be replaced by another member of this Everton squad, Paul Bracewell, in the 72nd minute. Peter Reid starting for the first time. Chris Waddle starting. Kerry Dixon of Chelsea starting for the first time. And Gary Lineker starting as well. And he'd be replaced by John Barnes in the 60th minute. England would take the lead in the 34th minute. And Kerry Dixon would score in the 54th and the 67th minute. And again, the third goal was a typical John Barnes coming on as a substitute cross from the left and header by Kerry Dixon. England won this match, but obviously all the extenuating circumstances kind of took the polish off the win, I would say.
It could have been slightly different because England went in to the half-time interval 1-0 up, but Bremer had just missed a penalty.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Schilt saved a Bremer penalty, which he doesn't do 6 years later in the semi-final of the World Cup. But yeah, so it could have been 1-1 going into the interval, but he misses and England go on to win. 2 Kerry Dixon goals.
Yes.
In the second half.
Yeah, so going back to the England squad, I guess of the Everton contingent, I mean, you had Trevor Stephen, Gary Michael Stevens, and Peter Reid would remain fixtures of England for the years to come. But I guess Paul Bracewell is the only one who really wasn't able to make the same impact as far as his England career. And he would gain 2 more caps, and his last one would be against Northern Ireland in November of that year.
Peter Reid gets 13 caps again, but then he does come late to the party. He's 28 by the time he got
right.
Technically, Lineker, I believe, is an Everton player at this point, so I don't know whether you can include him in that list. But
had he already signed for Everton?
I think he does go to. He's bought by Everton in May of this year.
Oh, in May. Oh, okay. So I guess technically
I think he is an Everton player, but he hasn't played for them yet.
So this competition ended, but the tour had not ended yet. Just a few days later. Oh, and can I go back to the German side just we can mention some of the names for that squad?
Yeah. It's a good team.
Yeah. You had Tony Schumacher of Cologne, Thomas Berthold of Frankfurt, Matthias Herget of Bayer Uerdingen, Dietmar Jakobs of Hamburg, Klaus Augenthaler, Bayern Munich. He was in the side, I guess Karl-Heinz Forster couldn't make it to this tour. Andy Brehme, we mentioned, from Kaiserslautern. Lothar Matthäus, Bayern Munich. Felix Magath of Hamburg. He'd be replaced by Olaf Thon of Schalke in the 60th minute. Uwe Rahn of Borussia Mönchengladbach. Pierre Littbarski of Köln. He'd be replaced by Herbert Voss of Leverkusen in the 73rd minute. And Frank Mill of Borussia Mönchengladbach. Again, a good team, but tired and in no shape to play. Going back to the tour, the very last match of this tour and this season, it would be against the United States at Los Angeles' Memorial Coliseum. So England lined up with Chris Woods making his debut for England from Norwich. You have Viv Anderson, Kenny Sansom. Kenny Sansom will be replaced by Dave Watson in the 55th minute. Terry Fenwick and Terry Butcher, central defense. Glenn Hoddle starting again. He'll be replaced by Trevor Stephen, 63rd minute. Brian Robson captaining the side. He'll be replaced by Peter Reid, 63rd minute. Paul Bracewell starting, Everton. Chris Waddle starting, again replaced by John Barnes, 75th minute. And up front, you had Kerry Dixon and Gary Lineker. Lineker and Dixon would each have a double. Lineker would score in the 12th minute, 47th minute. Kerry Dixon would score in the 32nd minute and 73rd minute. And Trevor Stephen would round out the scoring in the 80th minute.
Also, Glenn Hoddle missed a penalty in this.
Yes,
after 15
exactly.
minutes, Arnie Mauser, the American goalkeeper, saved his spot kick after Dixon was brought down.
So a positive way to end the tour.
I think a much better season for Bobby Robson here. He's now basically got his best starting 11. I think he's found now the players. I think probably the only one that's missing is Peter Beardsley from his World Cup squad. And he's laid the groundwork for qualifying for the World Cup. He now only needs, I think, a handful more points.
Right.
So much better. 8 out of 10 this season. 8 out of 10, I would give it. Maybe losing against Scotland and maybe the way that they lost against Mexico are the two. And maybe not being able to score against Finland are the low points. But on the whole, they did rather well this season. This is very good. And he's got, as I said, his core of his side now. He now knows who his best players are.
Some of the discoveries of the season are Chris Waddle, who is a big competition for John Barnes now as a winger. And obviously the Everton players. Trevor Stephen seems to be the most settled of the Everton newcomers. You can see that Gary Michael Stevens and Peter Reid are also going to stick around for a while. And again, Michael Stevens would be a fixture as a right back for the years to come. And we mentioned Paul Bracewell is the only one of that contingent that doesn't have a sustained run in the side. And Glenn Hoddle is back in the side. But again, with him, you can tell that he's always in and out of the side. Robson and Wilkins are fixtures in midfield. And the defense, you have obviously Shilton. At this point, Viv Anderson and Sansom are fixtures at right back, left back. In the middle, Terry Butcher and maybe Mark Wright or someone else. But Stephen looks like to be a starter with Wilkins and Robson in midfield. And just this competition with Waddle and Barnes up front. At the conclusion of this season, we would have to say that probably Mark Haitley, given his season, still had the nod as a front striker, with maybe Trevor Francis providing some experience. But you can see that Lineker and even Dixon are pushing for spots.
Yeah. I think Haitley still has the nod. We've said goodbye to Paul Mariner. I think Trevor Francis is he's now over 50 caps, but he's getting a little bit older. So yeah, I think Lineker and Dixon are pushing Haitley for that number 10 shirt.
And obviously Dixon would kind of disappear from contention in the coming years. But obviously, as far as Lineker, I mean, we can talk for hours about him. But overall, as far as the season, while they could have done without a tour, and I'm sure many of the players, they must have had Heisel in the back of their mind. And just in general, they could have done without a tiring tour at the end of the season. But I would say overall, as far as the national team, there is a spine that's being formed that would be there for years to come. So how was this tour regarded in general, Paul?
I think the idea of playing in Mexico wasn't a bad one to get used to the conditions and acclimatise, but they just played so many games at the end of this season after May, even the World Cup qualifiers, in a way that I don't think you would see these days. You know, especially there was no squad rotation. Those Everton players in particular, they won the league, they won the European Cup Winners' Cup, and they played in the FA Cup final. They played a lot of games that season, and then they're asked to fly halfway around the world to play in these games as well.
And let's remind everyone, the league was like 42 matches.
Yeah. So those players are going to have played upwards of 60 games, a lot of those players. You know, you just can't imagine it now. They wouldn't have been rested for FA Cup ties or anything like that, and they're still playing into the middle of June.
Yes. Squad rotation did not exist at this point.
Yeah, I think we've seen there's a lot more options there. There's a lot of players come in this season who will be around, and even if they're not starting players, they're going to be part of the squad and they're going to be options. Even Chris Woods, who's been around for a long time, he's coming in and he's going to be around the England team certainly up until the 92 Euros, I think.
Right.
Chris Woods, he takes over the number 1 shirt from Shilton when Shilton retires in 1990. Right. Chris Woods really is the only. I can't think of anybody else really in that period. I don't think there was any challengers really. Chris Wood after Shilton retired, we had, which was quite ironic really, because when Clements and Shilton they alternated in the 70s and early 80s.
Didn't David Seaman and Nigel Martin kind of come out around the same time, like towards the tail end of Shilton's England career?
So, but that was more late 90s. I think Seaman made his debut, I think, against Saudi Arabia, I think, which would have been 88.
Right.
88, yeah. So we're quite a way yet, I think. Chris Woods had a good run in the side.
Ironically, Chris Woods' final cap would also be against the United States in 1993. There's events off the field that obviously overshadow everything. But if we just concentrate on the national team, overall, it was a positive season. And you can see that Bobby Robson is creating a team for the years to come. And a lot of the players that we mentioned in the previous seasons are a distant memory at this point, as he's settled on this squad. So what other takeaways do you have from this season, Paul?
I think we said at the start that Bobby Robson was struggling to find prolific strikers, and Mariner and Woodcock and even Francis as we're coming towards the end of their England careers. Right. Dixon and Lineker were the top 2 scorers in the First Division this season, and obviously Kerry Dixon didn't really have a lasting international career, but in Lineker you've got the goal scorer that I think Bobby Robson had been looking for. And as Davey says, there's only really Peter Beardsley and then maybe Steve Hodge to come in that are going to be playing in 1986 and making an impact in that squad. Brian Robson's, at the top of his form when fit around this time. Glenn Hoddle's still, one of the best midfielders in England. Got Wilkins and Haitley playing in Syria. I think this is a much more settled and stronger squad all round than we've seen in the previous couple of seasons.
Getting back to this Everton side and the season they would have, was Derek Mountfield tipped as a potential international?
I think he must have been close. He scored quite a few goals as well.
I remember hearing here and there that he might, or he was considered, or he might be, but I guess he never. I think he may have played for the B team, but never the full national team. But that's one name that comes to my mind.
Yeah, again, just so many English players available from top First Division clubs. There was just a lot of competition for places. I think you said Paul Bracewell as well. He never really got too many more caps, and he was an excellent player, but there was a lot of competition. Centre midfield, centre of defence, certainly they were strong in those positions.
And we didn't even mention players like Gary Mabbutt or Graham Roberts, who at this point, they seem to be out of the England reckoning. But I guess Mabbutt would be back and forth here every few years. And Tottenham that season, they had a very good season. I think for the longest time, they were Everton's only competitors for the league race. Obviously, towards the end, Liverpool just pipped them to the second spot. But yeah, Tottenham were the only real competition to Everton in winning the title. So I'm surprised not more of their players were selected other than Hoddle or Gary Andrew Stevens. As far as the overseas players, obviously Mark Haitley's transfer to AC Milan really forged his place as the main striker. It kind of goes back to how we started earlier, how the tour of South America was kind of seen as a catalyst. Even though the results were average, it was seen as a turning point. And that kind of explains Mark Haitley's prominence and his fortunes in the national team.
John Barnes as well, and Barnes and Waddle now really for the rest of the decade.
Right.
They're competing.
All these last matches,
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame that Bobby Robson, he could be a little bit inflexible with his tactics. I think when you've got two players that talented, he could have maybe tried playing them together and playing them in different positions. And he went with a very rigid 4-4-2, I think pretty much for his whole reign as England manager. And I always think that's a little bit of a shame that maybe either of those two players could have been used maybe as a second striker in the whole. I think managers now would find a way of using those players.
Right, or overlap one another, who knows?
Yeah. It reminds you of the Gerrard and Lampard debate, where you couldn't play them together. But you could. It's just you what you need to do is put Paul Scholes in the middle, and then put Gerrard and Lampard around, and that's how you solve it. But Ericsson never did that. But yeah, you could see it now. But I think Paul's absolutely right. I think Robson was adamant that he'd have a system, and then he'd fit the players to the system, not the system to the players. I guess it became a competition between Waddle and Barnes. But having said that, because it was a reasonably successful season for England, the press was off Bobby Robson's back during all of this season and going into the 86 World Cup, because they did effectively qualify quite easily because they'd done all the good groundwork in this season. So the press, the knives were back in, as it were, for Robson. They'd soon come back out again. It was every time England didn't do very well. But this was, I think he had a lot easier ride from the press.
So how did the public and the press regard this tour? Like we said, the results weren't that good, but obviously there's all those other circumstances.
I don't think it attracted too much criticism, really. Like you say, at the time there were other issues that the English football was dealing with. And the Mexico games, not too bad an idea, but adding the extra game in America seemed a little bit strange and a bit much after such a long season.
I was just going to say the idea to go to Mexico for a dress rehearsal is a brilliant idea. I mean, get used to what it is, then you can go. It's why so many, as you said, so many managers came over to have a look at facilities, get an idea of going. Why they went to LA on the way home, and not entirely sure, but.
So that was not on the agenda. That was not on the original agenda. They just added it in the last minute. You think?
I'm not entirely sure why they decided to do that and why they needed to play an extra game. I don't know. Maybe they. I think. I don't know. Maybe they were expecting one extra game there. Maybe during the tournament, because they were expecting to play Mexico, Italy, West, which they did do. So no, can't be that. I don't know, to tell you the truth. I don't seem to remember it too well. I remember watching highlights, or it was like any end of season tour, really. They don't do them so much nowadays, but it was. I don't think, as you can see from the attendances, it wasn't particularly very well attended in Mexico. I very much doubt they would have been shown live in the UK. You probably got highlights, which I remember seeing. So there must have been shown somewhere. But no, it wouldn't have been particularly well noted. tournament back home.
Great goal from Gareth Lineker in this game, by the way. I think was about the only memorable thing. Lineker's first goal in this game was a really good volley.
I think everybody's waiting for the tournament next year. They're hoping that England will qualify, and then that really did become, because England had after two horrible first games, that 3-0 against Poland really galvanised the team, and if it wasn't for Maradona and his hands and his feet, England could have done rather well in that tournament. But this tournament, I think, didn't really register at all in the UK.
Any players that you think may have been overlooked by the national team this season that you personally clamored for?
Well, I always loved Gary Bailey. But as I've already said this, I thought Gary Bailey was amazing when I was a kid. I had pictures of Gary Bailey on my bedroom wall, and I can't believe he only ever got 2 England caps. That's an outrage for me. But no, joking aside, I don't know. There were maybe again. Hoddle's mercurial thing, he comes in and out of the side. Tottenham have a good season this season. As you said, they come third, being pipped on goal difference right at the end by Liverpool. But he's in and out of the side. So and when he does play, the goals he scores are pretty amazing. But why he's not a regular, again, he gets overlooked quite a lot. Maybe because he has big off days. And when he's good, he's good. But when he's bad, he can be bad.
I don't think Bobby Robson ever really trusted him in the centre of midfield. I think he obviously built that team more or less around Brian Robson, who was a great player, box to box player. And I think he wanted a player who was going to be maybe a bit more reliable, a bit more of a tackler and a worker than Hoddle alongside him, which he's then going to bring in. And Peter Reid's one of those players, or he'd trust Ray Wilkins to play in there. More of a holding player, really. So Hoddle's playing out on the right sometimes and in different positions that I don't think brought out the best of him necessarily.
And also, Lineker's not first choice just yet. He's still behind Haitley, and I think he's still playing Francis as well ahead of him, Mariner, Haitley. So Lineker's not established himself. I think, though, that for the following season, most definitely he becomes the first choice striker. But he's not top just yet. I think definitely Haitley is there above him. But you're getting to see that as we've mentioned, we're seeing the core of the team now. You're there. I don't think he's stopped tinkering now, and he now knows his best team. Maybe, as Paul said, maybe with Hodge and Beardsley coming in, they're the only real two that are yet to join for his 86 squad. But he's got it there now. So I don't think there are too many players that he's overlooked so much. I mean, he'd seen everybody. That was a big criticism in his early reign. He was having far too many players, using far too many players. So I think he saw as much as he could, to be honest.
For our next one, we'll discuss this World Cup, and that'll be a long discussion, by the way. So much to discuss and unpack for that one.
Yes, it's a really good World Cup as well. It's a great from the opening match to the final. It's a great World Cup, and then the next one's even better. Well, in my opinion, anyway, the 1990 World Cup is an even better World Cup. The 86 and 90 World Cup. I think we talked about this in the very first podcast about our favourite World Cups. 86 and 90, I think. I'm looking forward to next season, definitely, talking about next season, because it's not just for England as well. There's some crackers in the 86 World Cup.
Okay, well, with that, we'd like to thank Mr. Davey Naylor for his participation in this series. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. For any questions and comments, you may contact us on this blog. On Twitter, I'm on SP1873. On Facebook, I'm under Soccer Nostalgia. Mr. Paul Whittle is on Twitter at 1888letter. You may also follow the podcast on Spotify under Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. Mr. Naylor's contact info is englandstats.com, his website. Also, you may contact him at support@englandstats.com.
And on Twitter at England Stats.
At England Stats, yes.
That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me if anybody has any questions about England games we talked about or any England game, really. It's all there on the website.
Yes, I urge everyone. I mean, I've said this in our previous podcast with Davey. I urge everyone to visit his website, which is a treasure trove for any England national team fan, and can't praise it enough. So once again, Davey, thank you. We enjoyed these chats, going down the memory lane of the England national team. So
yeah, thank you, Davey, and looking forward to next time.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.